Automated Podcast.
Welcome to Automated. I'm your host, Mark Verbenkov, and in this weekly podcast, we will be exploring the impact of emerging technology on jobs, society, as well as us, with business and technology leaders, researchers, and independent professionals across the world. So if you work for pretty much any business today, one of the key activities is, of course, creating content for potential clients and customers to digest so that they can understand what service or product you are offering to the marketplace today. However, as you'll hear about more in today's episode, with the generation of the modern platforms that we all use today, the amount of content is actually so vast that many organizations often don't have a really coherent way of communicating their message, or even in some worst cases, a lot of the content doesn't even get edited because there's so much of it out there. But with the advent of artificial intelligence programs, how might the challenge of content creation actually be tackled? So my guest for today's podcast, Christopher P Willis, he is Acrolinx's Chief Marketing Officer, will elaborate on how content creation has changed over the last decades, but most importantly, how AI can play a role in not only benefiting an organization's communication strategy, but also how jobs will be transformed as a consequence of adopting this powerful technology. And he also answers the question of whether AI will be creating all the content for the organization of the future. So as Acrolinx's Chief Marketing Officer, Christopher is responsible for all aspects of the company's marketing strategy. He's a specialist in content governance, AI, and pipeline management with over 20 years of experience growing companies in the technology sector. Before joining Acrolinx, he held leadership roles in marketing, creative, technical, and business development at companies including Cambridge Technology Group, KPMG CT, Pixis Mobile, and many others. So Chris is a recognized thought leader in the areas of AI, DEI, and content governance, and is active within industry groups dedicated to the growth and health of marketing technology and the verticals he serves. Great. Well, thank you very much, Chris, for coming on to the Automated Podcast. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you, Mark. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion because this is, we'll be talking about AI and of course jobs, but also I think a little bit of content creation and marketing, which is two things that I don't think has been talked about on the podcast. And I don't think too many people necessarily connect those two things together. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Great.
But maybe we can get started with a little bit of, maybe not necessarily your background, but a little bit of like why you got into what you're doing today. Like, was there anything that was really exciting about either marketing, content creation, or AI, or was it just kind of a natural kind of organic growth and movement into what you're doing today?
So my current position at Acrolinx, we're a German-based company. We're focused on improving the quality and effectiveness of enterprise content. And everything that I've done in my career has brought me to where I am now. So what I mean is, I've been creating content as a driver for demand generation for decades. I'm a huge believer that content, and specifically actionable content, not just marketing content for marketing's sake, but content that helps people do something, is valuable in the demand process. It's valuable in the awareness process. People don't go on Google and search for my marketing buzzwords. They don't care what I think about what our product should be and how they should see it. They search on the web to solve problems. And if I can put content out there in the world that helps them solve their problems, whether they're ever going to buy my product or not, we're providing value and we're expanding our brand awareness. We're driving people back to us. And so doing this for several decades, there's challenges, right, in this process. And one of them is that I've never had a writer pool. I've never just had a bunch of people that have the title writer, that can create great content, that know my domain, that know our technology, that can just create amazing content. The people that create content in most organizations are the people that work there. when we go to work, a byproduct of our workday is content creation, whether it's the emails that we create, the scripts that we're building for our ads, the campaign materials, whatever it is. It's just things that we do in every role, from CEO all the way down. And we're not all trained writers. We didn't come from a journalism background or a writing background. And so writing skills are learned, not born with. Some people have learned more than others. So your best minds, these people that are creating this amazing content, super smart, super technical, not great writers. Let's amplify that with not great writers and potentially English as a second language.
Right.
And it makes it very difficult from an editorial process standpoint to do anything with this content, because it's very complex, it's very technical, it's wonderful concepts, but I can't read it. Yeah. It's not readable. It's unclear. It's using obscure or incorrect terminology. Grammatically, it's bad. And I can't just change it, because if I just change it, I'm changing the context. I'm not just changing the grammar and fixing it so now it's readable. I may have changed the technology that's being written about. So this editorial process of back and forth, I make some changes, I give it back to the writer who, in the case that I'm speaking of, is a product marketer who writes in English as their second language. And they make some changes and I make some changes and they make some changes, and we're back and forth and back and forth. And this process takes weeks, if not months, or with external editorial, costs tens of thousands of dollars a single piece of content. And in 2017, I ran into Acrolinx. And here's this solution that says, no. Push all of that back to the first draft. Use AI to guide the author as they're writing to create readable content, to use the words that you use, to leverage your brand language, to use your style guideline. And that was fascinating. Like that's a thing that's out there, and I need to know more about it. And in learning more about it, I took a job and work here. And it's not a matter of just thinking that this is an interesting place to work and this is another job. The people that work at this company are passionate about this. They've lived this world. And where content is super important to you, that content has to be right. It has to be perfect. It has to be in my voice. It has to leverage the language of our organization. And that's what we do. And that's how this all came to be. It's just another lucky experience in my life that put me in the right place at the right time.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, I think we'll definitely be spending a lot of time on the impact of AI within marketing and content creation. But I think it'd be useful for the audience to maybe put this into context a little bit, because if I'm thinking about marketing and content creation, say 20 years ago or so, I think it would be vastly different than what we're looking at today, right? With the advent of social media and the kind of possibility to talk directly with your clients. Could you maybe put that into context in maybe 2-3 decades ago compared to today? Like, is it really the social media platforms that have changed the way that marketing is done and content is being, I guess, chosen for the marketing?
It's definitely played a large role. The difference, at least in my world, is the way that content is used and distributed. 20 years ago, a piece of content was created. It was a piece of content. It was used as that piece of content. You could literally print it and bind it. And that's the only way that it's ever going to be used. If it's effective, that's great. If it's not, it's canceled and moved to the next piece. Today, when we create a piece of content, a large piece of content, say an ebook, there's the ebook. And then there's all the pieces of the ebook that we break out, all of the artifacts of that piece of content that go to separate channels. And the channels are numerous. We distribute through partners, we distribute through social. We are sending specific content out to specific personas. So I'm taking chapters out of a book and sending you only the content that you care about. I'm taking that whole book and I'm remastering it for individual industries. So we take something that could be general and horizontal and turn it into a financial services version and make it very specific. So that one piece of content becomes very reusable. It's just a matter of how we cut it and how we place it and where it goes. And then we can measure each of those channels to see where we're gaining traction. How effective is this for us so that we know where to go next? And the challenge is it's almost never the same. Just because you have a huge success on LinkedIn with a specific piece of content doesn't mean that the next piece of content you're going to have, you go all in on LinkedIn, because that might not resonate the same way. It could be that this next piece of content does really well on TikTok. Yeah. And who would have known? But there are huge followings of writers on TikTok that care about that kind of content. It just changes the way that you think about what you're building. You have to think about modular aspects of your content. What's reusable? Where are you going to place it? How are you going to cut this up? And what's the end goal? So when we create when we create the plan, the brief for an individual piece of content, it's not just that. It's the map of where this is going to go before we ever even get started, so that we know how to build it and how to make it as infinitely reusable as possible.
Right. So even in the design or the early phases of that content being created, it's already kind of decided where it's relevant to be seen, which platform to be used on. I guess you can also state, or you can also see which platform would have, I guess, more. I mean, you brought up the example of LinkedIn, right? So there would be like a much more professional type of audience on that platform versus TikTok, which would be, I guess, more fun and, kind of relaxed type of content. So
it's top down, bottom up, right? Yeah. So how do we get in front of the writers and the editors that are the users of our product? And then how do we get to the enterprise, the CMOs and the VPs of technical documentation and marketing that would actually be the executive buyers? And, again, one thing, we have one message with this one book, but how do we create that to speak in these multiple voices?
And maybe this ties into the to kind of the AI, the main point of the discussion. But are we seeing, or are you seeing this growing as time goes on, right? As there are more platforms that are coming out, or platforms that are changing in dominance, right? Like TikTok is now one of the larger platforms, whereas only 1 or 2 years ago it was kind of a smaller name. Do you see that this breakdown of content, right, from the ebook to many different pieces of content, is that growing over time? Or are we seeing kind of a saturation point? What's your point of view on that?
It is, and you can actually take it even further back. So one of the things that I think is important to think about when you think about content in the enterprise today is that it's all part of the customer experience. And when you think about the customer experience leader, you're not necessarily thinking about content creation. You're thinking about maybe an experience on a website or a buying experience, but it goes beyond that. Years ago, not so long ago, actually, 1.5 years ago, we were marketing, and it probably started 10 years ago, talking about the digital shift. The digital shift is coming, and you got to be ready. It's this fear, uncertainty, and doubt that you're an enterprise that's not ready for the day when only the internet matters. I'm not sure any of us really thought that day was going to come, but it was a great message. And then last March hit. Whoops, there it is. Digital shift has occurred, it's over, and the winners are the ones that were ready. And this content creation process and this unlimited channel doesn't just start at marketing. It doesn't just start at ebooks. It starts all the way back at the beginning of the process. It starts in product development. It starts in technical documentation. It starts in the UI strings in the product. All of these things need to align throughout the entire customer experience. I see the product, I use the product. Is the language correct and in the right voice in the product? When I read the technical documentation, is it clear, concise? Does it use that same language? Is there consistency across both of those? Then I open up the manual. Does the manual tell me the same story? Does it tell it to me in the same language? Do I understand it? I'm looking at marketing materials, sales materials, educational experience content, support content, service documentation. All of this comes together to create this experience that I have either online or through published content with a brand, with a product. So as I start this process of communication, this experience, I need to think all the way back to the beginning. What am I going to call this thing? How am I going to explain this process? Because when I create a marketing ebook, it better align all the way through. It needs to use that same language. If I say test on page 1 of my product documentation, and I say quality on page 700 of my ebook, I've confused my audience. It's all one thing. So thinking through every aspect of this, thinking about the reusability and modular pieces of content that I can build, I end up with a lexicon that allows me to build out everything that I'm going to create. I know how to communicate from a marketing standpoint to create my outside thought leadership and actionable content. But I also know how to talk from a service and support standpoint. So my services team, my support team have access to this same lexicon and can answer questions using the language that we've created all the way back at the beginning of the process. So this holistic approach to the way that we communicate feeds into the creation of content. It makes it a lot more complex, but that then allows you, like you're saying, to go into any channel. I can use this content anywhere. I have something for everyone, and it's all aligned, and it's all consistent, and it's all readable.
So it makes perfect sense that this is something that enterprises should be doing. What is your experience with enterprises that are actually doing this, right? I would assume that those companies that weren't necessarily prepared for this new digital era that we're now living in would have had to really rush through a couple of processes to get something like this in order to get onto the digital platforms that everybody was using, especially during the lockdown period. Is there a substantial transition period for this to happen, for these companies to get to this level of I guess flow?
Yes, and I mean, even in the biggest companies in the world, I think most of them are not really near this yet.
Yeah.
They've gotten remarkably good in their product groups. So modular content has come to technical documentation, to product teams. There's lots of reusable content that they use to create their materials, their documentation, their manuals. If you think in terms of one of our customers makes motorcycles, and they have product manuals in the hundreds of pages. And the interesting thing about this particular company is that their riders are enthusiasts more than just riders. They have a language of their own. I don't pretend to understand it. They also tend to hire people that come from that enthusiast pool. So you have people that communicate at a vernacular level that are creating your product manuals. So you could end up with different language throughout. Whoever has chapter 1, chapter 3, chapter 7, using completely different language to describe the same part on the motorcycle. And this company's had to get very good at creating that reusable modular content to tell that story consistently, not just in the product manual, but anywhere where I would go to get that question solved. So if I'm asking, how do I connect the battery cable? There's one answer. And that answer is on page 7, page 56, page 322, in a support ticket, on the website, and anywhere else I would look to answer that question, regardless of who wrote it, regardless of how they communicate and how they would describe that. Because that's the clarity level that will allow their experience in the marketplace to be positive for their riders. That's how they keep people satisfied. So technical documentation, they've gotten really good at this. Marketing is a laggard in this space because writing is an art, right? So we're creating, we're ideating, we're building exciting new things. But at the same time, that clarity needs to feed into the materials that are out there in the marketplace, espousing the values of your product. And so bringing those two groups together is a challenge that we've been involved with for the last 3 years or so, trying to get those groups to work closer together, to leverage what technical documentation, technical content teams have done to bring that into the marketing world. We're seeing the bridge be gapped over marketing between the technical product organization and service and support to leverage that same language. So that at least we're having the same conversation in learning the product, that we are in solving problems for the product. But this is early days. Digital shift or no, bringing an organization together at the largest scale, tens of thousands or 100,000 employees speaking in one voice is a challenge. We have one customer that their primary driver, board level initiative, is to talk like a person. As one of the most technical companies in the world, how do you get everybody in your organization, the best and brightest in the world in technology, to speak like a person? And it's about understanding the tone of voice that we want to use, the style that we want to use, the liveliness, the clarity levels, knowing what the education level is of our audiences, building in inclusive language guidance so that we're communicating to everyone, not just a part of our audience, analyzing the emotion in our content so that we know that we're not communicating with misery and despair, because it's possible. And all of that comes together to create an experience that you have every day with this brand, in a way that makes it feel like there's somebody that you're talking to, even though there are hundreds of thousands of people behind the scenes on that.
Okay, that's clear. So you alluded a little bit before, but is this then where artificial intelligence comes in to make that consistent language consistent throughout most of the content? Maybe you can touch on the impact that artificial intelligence is having in this space.
It is. So this is something that, I mean, it's a challenge at best and impossible at most, to be able to manage this manually. Everybody that creates content has a whiteboard in their office, and that whiteboard has everything that they care about. It has that tone of voice. It has the personas that they create content for, the audience and the education level of that audience, and how they want to communicate clarity to that audience. It has the words that they want to use and the words that they don't want to use, everything about their content. Problem is, it's written on a whiteboard so nobody can see it. And even if people across your organization could see it, we already identified they're not professional writers. So they probably don't care what's on your whiteboard. They're just trying to write down their thoughts and get it submitted. Yeah. And so for an organization to be able to edit that kind of content is impossible. We look at, we have a customer that was missing the review process on almost 99% of their content. They had a team of editors. Content was submitted. Content's supposed to go through editorial before it reaches production. 1% of their content was being checked. 99% was either moving to production without being edited or hitting the floor. Yeah. And so that's best case. That's a huge technology company with the money to be able to manage this. They're getting 1% coverage of their content because content is huge. That's a whole nother thing that we could talk about. It's just what content means inside an organization, but there's a lot of content. And so if I'm only editing 1%, I'm creating risk for my business. That's where AI comes in. That's where a smart system will learn all of those guidelines, capture those right off the whiteboard, make those actionable, and then through multiple mechanisms, guide writers to leverage that whiteboard, to follow those rules. The easiest way to start the conversation about what a guideline is on day one, when we turn the AI on, everybody spells the name of our company right, no matter what. And for a company that has a simple name, that's easy. But think of a tricky name, American Express. Right. Do you work at Amex? Do you work at AE? Do you work at American Express? What do we want people to write? Or are there different times when we want them to write it? American Express is always the first time. Then we change to Amex in the second and third. And we can also abbreviate it on these pages. And I can't know that. Like, I can't keep up with that. And I shouldn't have to. So the first guideline that we set is the first writing of the company name is American Express, capital A, capital E. Boom, done. And if you understand that very simple rule, that's a guideline. What else would you do? Well, we like this set of words. We don't like this set of words. Fantastic. Now we're talking about terminology guidelines. So if somebody says the word test and I want them to say the word quality, they type it and I say, actually, did you mean to say quality? We don't really love test. And here's a reason why. Give an example, help people to understand why we want them to say the things that we want them to say. This is unclear. Why is it unclear? Your sentences are too long. You're using too many big words. You're using marketing buzzwords that we would prefer you not use. Your content is just way too formal. We're trying to talk again like a person. Can you add liveliness to this content? Here's some examples of how. And so in my first authoring process, as I create content for the first time, the end result of that first writing is usable content. So let's say that we don't do anything else with that. It never touches a human editor. I have a numeric score that tells me that it's okay. I've created a quantification of good. There's a numeric value that says, yep, cool, this is okay. There's another numeric value that says this is great and can go right to publication. So you start building in automated gates into your content workflow of this content needs to reach this level. And if it does, it's probably okay. We should put it out. And that changes these companies that are getting 1% coverage of their content from 1% to as much as 100% automatically, because it's not a person thing. AI doesn't care. It's ultimately scalable. So we can run as many pieces of content through as you'd like. And what comes out is that usable reviewed content with all of the auditing of where it started and where it ended. So you can see the problems that we experienced in the original writing, the problems that were improved, problems that were not improved, reasons why, and how it comes out the other end. So we can feel good about the fact that we've aligned as a company. So what that does in essence is it allows you to write in that singular voice, no matter who's writing in your organization. And those people can sound smarter, more domain, more aligned with the business because they're guided in real time. But that's just the authoring process. There's also the aspect of today, there's data repositories of millions and millions of pages of content. There's websites in existence right now, again, with millions of pages of content. So what do I do about what I already own? Because there is huge risk in that content, especially in, think financial services, think life sciences, regulated industries where regulations change. So the content that I wrote that was approved by legal 3 months ago may not make it through regulatory compliance today, but it's in a repository and it's available. Somebody can go grab that and use it, hand it to a customer, submit it for something, and it's out of compliance. That's where now this same AI can go into repositories and read all of your documents, find all the problematic language, all the misalignment, flag all of that, and allow you to go in and then make your decisions on how to change those things. We don't really believe that this level of automation should happen without human intervention, because in some cases, I've used test versus quality as an example. Sometimes I want to say test. I don't. You're going to tell me that you think I mean quality, but I don't actually. I mean test. I need to have that decision point. We could automate and just say you can never say it. You can never say test. You always have to say quality, but that wouldn't make sense. So that interaction between computer and person gets that personal touch that turns this into usable content. But again, here's everything that's wrong with all of your content. Go ahead and now just make your decisions on fixing it.
Okay. One question that I have from that is, typically when people think about artificial intelligence, they think about, learning, right? Taking from previous either emails or previous content and learning, and changing the result or changing the output from that. From what you were explaining, it sounds like there are these kind of parameters that are set up at the beginning, and then the AI is able to make that coherent language, the content that is produced kind of coherent. Is there an aspect of learning in your artificial intelligence program that takes from other documents, emails, etc., and modifies the language of the company so that it's coherent, but on a as it's changing?
So let's give two examples. One is the way that the system is trained. So there is an interface, and I can go in and tweak switches and make changes, evolve and create the voice that I want. But an easy way is for the system to learn from your existing content. So give me 100 pages of amazing content. Give me your best. And the system will go in and look at all of that content, find the commonalities, and build a guideline set that allows you to create content that is like this awesome content. And we can do that over time. So as your content evolves, we just keep learning, keep changing. Tell me what's great. Show me what you love, and we can help you build what you love. A different example would be terminology. Mm-hmm. So the words that we use as a company, there are some that will never change. Our company name will never change. But the way that we communicate, the words that we use for whatever reason can change over time. And the ability to teach the system through feedback from the actual writers of this is not how we talk anymore. So I'm going to point this out to the system. You're telling me to say quality, not test, but we've changed on that. The market has changed on that. The world is changing on that. And we need to evolve. Here's the feedback into the system that says that we need to do that. And then we can go make decisions on how we communicate further. So the system continually evolves the way that we communicate based on the world around us. Mm-hmm. You especially see that in places like inclusive language. So as we're governing inclusive language, providing those guidelines that help companies to be aligned around inclusion, that's changing rapidly. So the system needs to be able to allow the evolution of language as this changes, so that you're not saying things from a month ago that we don't say anymore. And that sounds extreme, but that's absolutely what's happening in the world right now. We're still learning. This is early days of how to be sensitive, how to involve diversity and inclusion in our thought process and our decision making. So it's just as much teaching the system as it's the system teaching the writer.
Okay, fair enough. So one of the larger themes of the podcast that kind of gets touched on in each episode is, of course, the impact on jobs, right? So if I'm putting myself in the shoes of an audience member, I would assume that everything that you're explaining would kind of make an editor obsolete. So we talked about this beforehand, before the recording, but yeah, it seems like if an editor is going to be obsolete, there's going to be, tons and tons of people in many organizations. Once they apply your AI, they're going to be eliminated. So I know that you said that that's not the case. Maybe we can, or you can describe that a little bit further, so that the audience members are clear as to why people aren't going to be, eradicated from their positions.
Sure. So at the same, I'm going to start with two different models, but at the same time that this is automating the process, the demand for content is increasing. So let's take product documentation. I'm working alongside, I'm a content creator that works alongside the development organization. My specific job is editing this content that comes as an artifact of, for instance, the continuous integration process inside our development organization. We went from waterfall to agile to continuous integration. We're on our way to continuous deployment. We are consistently over time increasing the speed of our development. You know what you can't increase or decrease? You can't decrease the amount of time it takes to edit content. It is a thing that happens. You've got a person involved and they need to be involved in this process. It just takes a certain amount of time. So this automation allows the editorial process to keep up with the speed of development. It clears up that editor to become a smart content creator because content requirements are increasing. I don't have in the enterprise enough people to do the things that I want to do. I don't have enough people to create content. And what's worse is my content demands are increasing. Any analyst firm, Gartner, Forrester, whoever will tell you that 80% of people in the enterprise believe that content is the thing that drives business, and all of them believe that they need more. So I'm not getting more budget, I'm not getting more people, but yet you want me to do more. That lets these editorial folks do what they're best at, which is create great content and get out of the way of the process. So that's on the technical documentation side. That could be on the marketing side. If you look closer to support, so think about this for a second. Support is spending a lot of time on the phone. Who would be removed if support content was more clear, consistent, easy to understand, and would solve more problems? Those phone support people. Who knows the most about creating the content, the message, to solve problems? The phone people.
Mm.
So this is a big cycle. It works in a circle. The better the content associated with support tickets, the more clear, concise, and readable, the less we need the phone people, but the more content we need to create to solve more problems. We're eliminating the calls into the support team that cost money to support. At the same time, we're leveraging those people to create more content that solves more problems and creates higher NPS and better customer experience. So nobody's actually leaving the building. We're just eliminating the manual work and allowing people to do the creative work, the ideation work that only people can do. It's very difficult for computers to do that. There's lots of systems that talk about how they create content today. They're not there yet.
Yeah.
People create content. But people don't need to be part of the manual process of rote editorial. They need to be part of that creation process. And that's where we're seeing these things happen. So I talked about a company that went from 99% misses to 100% coverage. They went from 4 technical editors to no technical editors as they made that evolution. But what happened was those 4 technical editors that were eliminated became essentially writers that, through their budget, self-funded initiatives that that organization was unable to do prior. They could do more as a result of leveraging that automation. So it's very different than just coming in and saying, you're all replaced by a computer. If we were static and stagnant, nothing was growing and nothing was evolving and I didn't need more, yeah, that would probably be a real fear. But that's not where we are in the market. The enterprise needs more content, whatever it is. We live in a world where millions of articles of content are created every second, and there just isn't enough to keep up. So if I can leverage these people to do more, I'm not letting them go. I'm moving them into roles where they're the most valuable.
Yeah, that's something that keeps coming up in the discussions that happen on the podcast. It's not necessarily, I mean, not always. Sometimes you have people that are replaced, but I'd say for the vast majority of the enterprises in these discussions, there's always this transformation of the individual employee or groups of employees from doing something a little bit more manual, a little bit more repetitive, maybe a little bit more boring, towards something that's a little bit more creative or using your higher senses, if you will, that not only benefits the individual, but of course benefits the organization.
I mean, there's a huge value case just in looking at what that type of a team costs and seeing what their value really is if they're just doing the editorial process versus when you shift that value to the creation process. It becomes a whole different structure inside the organization. And just in my company, I see that. We use our product, obviously, and the value to me and my organization is in the $200,000 a year range. That's the money that we essentially print by using our product to manage our editorial process. And I measure that in people time. How much time do our people not spend dealing with that editorial work? And with that savings, we do more. So the very real example of that is that my head of content is also tasked with running, she's the leader of the product marketing team as well, because she's not spending 30 hours a week dealing with the combined editorial process of all the content that's coming into our organization and being created in our organization. That's done automatically. She's able to be strategic. She's able to be above all that. And see the full view of what we need to do from product communication all the way through.
Very interesting. Yeah. I brought up something, maybe want to go back. Like, I also think that when many people think about, say, AI that's producing content or, stories, anything that's kind of slightly creative, there's still this notion that, oh, I'll be able to tell the difference between something that's written by an AI and something that isn't. Can you touch on that a little bit? Because I think it's something that's still in kind of the cultural zeitgeist of people's minds. They don't necessarily know just how powerful AI is, and of course will be, but that's a whole other discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I think today it's still fairly young. You have all, whoever's listening to this, have all read content that's been created with AI. And you've all been tricked. It's out there. There are some really good systems that are doing this. They're not necessarily the ones that are advertised on the web and that are marketing to you and your marketing organizations about creating better headlines. But there's some work that's happening right now that's very effective. It learns from content lexicons, brings content together. But again, it goes all the way back to the beginning of this conversation, where you need to have that baseline content. You need to have content that can be used. It doesn't create from scratch. You can't say, write a book about marketing, go. It needs to be fed. It needs to take something and turn that into something. Where we will eventually get to is that there will be so much reusable content available that nothing new will ever need to be written. And we're still a bit away from that. But that will take away the human creativity. Will you be able to tell that it was written by a computer versus a person? Probably not. Will you like it as much? Will it be as impactful? Probably not, because it's going to lack some of the edge, some of the humor, some of the liveliness that you would have creating. Some of my favorite music in the world has mistakes in it. There's an Alanis Morissette song that was on the Jagged Little Pill album. Taylor Hawkins was the drummer during that time, and he misses one beat. And that is my favorite moment in that song, because they actually recorded it. It's real. It's not computers. And people know the difference. It's not to say that I also don't like the production behind Justin Timberlake. That's really great. And it was built on a computer, but it's different. I like that one drum beat that was missed. And that's what you miss with AI.
Right. Well, then maybe we can shift it towards the future a little bit. So, I mean, I work in a small business, and I have constant communications with the marketing and communications team. And I mean, many of the kind of struggles and challenges that you've described, they of course are living proof of. And one of the girls was asking me like, "Oh, please ask whether I will be doing content, in the future. Like, will an AI system be able to do all of the kind of content creation, and I'll just be able to focus on, I don't know, generating connections with other people and other businesses?" So you did touch on it a little bit, but maybe you can touch on like the future of artificial intelligence within content creation as you see it.
So I think there's always going to be that base level, that baseline creation of content. There needs to be that first push that would allow the computer to move forward. So great content creators are always going to be great content creators at that first step. And it's going to be up to the individual, up to the organization, how far they take that content before they hand it off and say, take this. We talked about derivatives, taking content and turning it into multiple sources. That's a great use case for AI. I have this thing. It's this one book. Go ahead, take it. Make it for financial services, make it for pharmaceuticals, make it for marketers, make it for tech docs, make it for other people. That's a great use case for this. In our world, it's slightly different. What I think about from a future standpoint is today, we've talked a lot about guidelines. I talked about the whiteboard and the things that I know about how I want to create content. Here's the problem with that. That's made up. So I guess that I know what my audience thinks. And I know that that's what companies do, because Gartner did a survey recently and said that 80% of CMOs know that they're making up the way that they're going to communicate, the voice of their content. I think I'm pretty good at guessing. I mean, it's my job, and I think I'm good at it, but I'm not great because it's just a guess. And where I want to see our product go is in the ability to either validate that or improve that. So if I think I know, I can teach the system. Fantastic. If I don't, turn it on. Turn on the base product. It's got some style guidelines to it. You can add some terminology guidelines to it, but it doesn't really know a lot about you. What's going to happen is content's going to come out of it. I'm going to create content. I'm going to edit it with this guideline set. And it's going to come out the other end. And I'm going to put it out in the world. And we're going to integrate specifically with web analytics and production analytics and see how content is performing. The easiest example of this is support content. So I'm going to create a support ticket. It's It's going to run through Acrolinx. It's going to go out into the world. And for lack of a more graceful solution right now, there's a happy face and a sad face at the bottom of the support ticket. Happy, cool, solution's working. Sad, why? And how do we gather that information? Can I gather that it's a clarity issue, that I'm using words they don't understand, that it's in a voice that they don't appreciate, and then feed that information back into our AI and iteratively create the voice that the audience wants. Today, I talk a lot about strategy aligned content. So I have a strategy, I'm aligning my content with it. Where I want to get us to is audience aligned content. How does my audience feel? What do they want to hear? How can I learn that from them and have a system create the A/B testing to constantly get closer to my audience? So I don't need to know, I don't need to guess. They're telling me in real time. And my organization, my global enterprise can get granular and speak to different audiences inside their persona set, their consumer base, in the voices that those audiences want to hear, that they appreciate, and build those tighter bonds. Because that level of communication, that's how we generate our business. It's how we retain our customers. That's how we create that delight that makes us the biggest brands in the world. So if I can get better at that, that's the future of being a successful customer experience. That's where I see this getting really exciting. But to the question of your organization, yes, if she is a great content writer, she'll always be able to be a great content writer because there's always going to be the need for that baseline.
Yeah. Okay. Clear. I also see the time's running down here, so maybe one of the last questions here. So I mean, we're talking a lot about content as this kind of maybe even nebulous term. When I picture it, it's a lot of text that's going out on behalf of the enterprise. Of course, there's pictures and videos as kind of the other two media forms. Do you see that the AI systems? I mean, we've had like deepfake organizations come onto the podcast before. Do you see that these AI systems, as of course, it's early days, but as they continually get better, the type of content that they're going to be able to generate will also change? And maybe I'll just let you go on that.
Yeah, I mean, today, when we talk about content, it really is, a web page, a URL, a page of content that you would see either on a screen or on your desk. But content goes beyond that. Content's a problematic word, right? Because it doesn't really mean the same thing to everybody. It depends on your job. But it includes and will include voice assistant scripts, scripts for videos, interfaces in the product, that user interface of the product. It could be a text on a billboard, on the highway. It could be anything that's written or spoken or communicated. Everything that we do starts with written word in some way. And so as systems get smarter and can move further into ideation and again, take that base and say, okay, well, we have this ebook, it's on content governance. I'm going to need an Alexa script. I'm going to need my ad campaign. I'm going to need to turn this into financial services content. I'm going to need to market this specifically to a single company and a voice that we use with that company. That's where AI needs to be able to rip into this. And I understand what I mean. What are the best qualities of an Alexa script? What does a billboard look like? How do I take an ebook and put it on a billboard and create this whole holistic global marketing campaign, for instance, around this one thing? That's absolutely where this is headed.
Awesome. Well, maybe that's a great place to end the discussion then. Chris, I'll have the website for Acrolinx up. Is there any other way that you want listeners to reach out or follow what you guys are doing and the exciting work that you have out there?
I mean, the website's a great place to go. You can follow us on LinkedIn. We're listed under Acrolinx. I am CP Willis on LinkedIn. And probably lots of other ways that you can find us on the internet. But we'd be excited to have this conversation further. So feel free to reach out.
Terrific. Well, thanks a lot for coming onto the podcast. I think it's really interesting, and also for I think, as I mentioned at the beginning, like one of the first times that we've talked about how AI impacts the generation and creation of content. So thanks a lot for coming on and sharing some insights into that. It's quite an interesting field.
Thank you very much, Mark. This was great.
Great, thanks.
The Automated Podcast.
Welcome to Automated. I'm your host, Mark Verbenkov, and in this weekly podcast, we will be exploring the impact of emerging technology on jobs, society, as well as us, with business and technology leaders, researchers, and independent professionals across the world.